Welcome to Staying Connected, a podcast where I talk to people about their stories with VEDS, Marfan, Loeys-Dietz, and related vascular and aortic connective tissue conditions. This is your host, Katie, and before we get into the show, I want to remind you that the views, information, and opinions in this podcast are those of the individuals involved, and the information presented does not constitute medical or other professional advice or services. Any opinions that I express in this podcast are my own and not of my employer. I hope you enjoyed the last episode of Staying Connected with Dominga No, sharing her story with Marfan syndrome. This week, we're talking to Brent Tuinstra, sharing his story with Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome, or VEDS. A reminder before we go over to the interview that VEDS research study by Maya Brown-Zimmerman, titled The Role of Community in Mental Health, a Grief and Trauma-Related Needs Assessment in the Vascular Ehlers-Danlos Syndrome Population, is still open. There's a link in the episode show notes if you'd like to take that survey and haven't done so yet. The survey is open to people with VEDS and their parents, partners and spouses, and siblings at least 13 years old. Also, if you like this show, you can support it by joining my Patreon. My supporters on Patreon make it possible for me to continue producing this podcast, and you can join and support this show for just a few dollars a month. But whether you support this work through the Patreon or just by sharing it, it all helps, so thank you. Let's get into the show. Hey, Brent, thank you so much for joining me on the podcast to share your story with VEDS. Would you like to introduce yourself to people who don't know you?
Hi, Katie. My name is Brent Tuinstra. I live in Minnesota. I was diagnosed in 2018 after a bowel perforation.
Tell me about that bowel perforation.
So my bowel perforation happened in July of 2018. I remember like it was yesterday. So I farm with my brother. And July is kind of haymaking season and baling. And for probably 3 to 4 weeks before my initial event, I just felt crummy. But it also was super, super hot. And when you are doing grass hay and alfalfa hay, it's not the smoothest job in the world. I mean, you kind of bounce up and down quite a bit. And so a couple days before I actually went into the hospital, I started to get some stomach pain, and I had some constipation issues and stomach issues basically my entire life. So I just kind of passed it off as it was just one of those deals where I forgot to take my Miralax or whatever, and business as usual. So I really started to feel bad on a Friday afternoon. It was, evening. About 7 o'clock, I just called my brother and I said, "Yeah, I know we got a few things left to do for the day, but I got to go home." I says, my stomach hurts. I says, it feels like somebody takes a knife and stuffs it into my belly button and or onto the left side of my stomach. So I just got to go home. I got to sleep. We had a big day Saturday planned. I ran the main machine in that process where we were going to chop some forage for some animal feed. And he said, "I think I'll be fine, but you might want to come up with plan B just in case." I went home, fell asleep, never ate no supper, fell asleep. I think I woke up 8 o'clock the next morning. Stomach pain, not too bad, felt okay. Hung around the house, didn't do much. Saturday night, come along. Amber, come home. That's my wife. Come home and, "What, do you want something to eat?" And I was like, "Yeah, sure, I'll take something." And the meal, I don't remember what it was. Doesn't matter. But, it went fine. I felt okay. And then an hour or two later, I started to have stomach pain again. And I had been drinking Gatorade all day long because I was worried about being dehydrated. And that was super hot. And I thought, well, maybe I was a little dehydrated. So I drank Gatorade pretty much the whole day Saturday. And I started throwing up about 10 o'clock that night, which throwing up for me was super rare. Like I could count on one hand the times I had thrown up since I became an adult. So it was a little bit of a red flag for me. And drank some more liquid and it sat fine. And then pretty soon I was puking again. And this went on for a few hours. And finally about 3:30, 4 o'clock Sunday morning, I went and woke up Amber, and he says, well, I hate to do it, but I says, we got to go to the emergency room. I says, I must have a really bad case of flu, or I got something going on. I wasn't worried it was my pancreas because it wasn't on that side. I was like, I don't think it's pancreatitis. And I says, I just bad case of the flu.
Did you have a fever?
I don't remember even checking, so I don't believe I did. Really, my only symptoms, I didn't have diarrhea. My only symptoms really was the stomach pain, which, they were intense. Like, I can't obviously associate pain with labor pain, but when you ask a woman that's had a child, that cramp, stab feeling, that's what I experienced for about a minute. And then it would go away, and I could go maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes, never bothered. And I kept thinking to myself, well, it worked for the last 3 days. It's been rough and hot. And now maybe I got a stomach cramp or something going on, or a muscle strain. So I just, typical man thing. I didn't go to the hospital probably as quick as I should have. But, at that point, I was a 34-year-old, generally healthy male. I had no reason to believe it was anything worse than food poisoning or stomach flu or nothing like that. So hopped in the car, drove 20 minutes to a local ER. And by that time I got there, I was starting to experience constant pain. And I'm fortunate. I live in a smaller community. I walked right into the ER. There was nobody else there. I told them my symptoms. I have a stomach pain. Okay, we'll get you a room. Bring me back. Probably sat in that room for a half an hour. And I'm like, hey, listen, can you guys give me something for the pain? Because it's starting to get pretty intense. Like, this is more than I'm used to, just regular constipation pains or gas pains or anything like that. Well, we want to hold off until we get you in a CT machine. So I was fortunate. They didn't mess around. They got me into a CT machine within half hour, 45 minutes of me being there. There was a smaller hospital. They didn't have a radiologist on site, so they had to send the images off. Half hour later, they come back. Yeah, you got a couple of little holes in your bowel. I look at my wife and I'm like, I can't really figure out if that's like really, really bad, because their tone kind of was like, well, you just got a couple small holes in your bowel.
Like, no big deal.
Yeah, and I looked at my wife and I'm like, this is probably not going to be too good, is it? Well, lo and behold, 20 minutes later, ambulance was there, picked me up, gave me an NG tube, which, have you ever had one of them?
I haven't.
Not awesome. Went to a local major hospital that was probably half an hour away from the site that I was at. Surgeon met me at the door of the ambulance, says, yep, you got a couple bowel perforations kind of pointed in my stomach. We're going to go in laparoscopically, stitch those couple holes up, and we'll get you back on the road to recovery. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, right, this ain't going to be too bad. A couple stitches and I'll be back to normal, and wheel me back, and things didn't go quite to plan, I guess, after that.
Yeah, what happened?
So I'm not quite sure how long I was in the back. I woke up and I instantly knew, like, before I was even conscious enough to know, I instantly knew that stuff really went downhill fast. My first indicator was I was still open, and I had a big wound vac running from basically my sternum almost to my groin. That's how large my incision was. And I'm like, I guess the holes ended up being a little bigger than they anticipated. And then I reached down and I felt an ostomy, and I was like, what the hell is this? And then I had some stuff on the other side too. And I'm like, what is that? And I look over, and my mom and my she was my girlfriend at the time, wife now, were like white as a ghost. Like, almost like they had seen somebody that was dead wake up from the dead. And I'm like, what happened? Like, what the hell? I was like, I thought this was supposed to be very simple. 2 little holes in my stomach, fix a couple leaks, and we're on our way. This is not what I consider on my way.
Mm-hmm.
So eventually the surgeon come out and explained that I had 2 holes, and the minute they touched them to do anything with them, it all fell apart, and he associated trying to sew wet paper towels or wet tissue paper back together. And he was like, I've never seen anything like this in my life. I don't know what's going on here. But he says, I did what I could. I got in. I got your ostomy built. I got a mucus fistula on the other side. He says, I preserved almost all of your intestines, except for, he says, you probably lost between where your large and small hooked together. They call that the julium, I believe. He says, we ended up taking that out, and then about 6 inches of your large intestine. But he says, we saved everything else. But he says, you were completely pumped full of stool. Your body cavity was completely full. Like, he made it sound like when he started to cut, like stool poured out of my body cavity. So then at that point, he knew it was going to be no good. So at that point, I didn't realize how bad my life had changed. I just knew I was very angry because I had an ostomy. I was very angry because I had an incision from chest to groin. I was very angry. Nobody seemed to have any answers why everything went bad. And then that started my journey to the ending point of my diagnosis with VEDS. I'm very thankful to be alive. I was told I died at least once. I was almost to the blood transfusion area. Don't believe they ever gave me any blood, but I was like super close. So after about, they had a wound vac on, pulling out the stool and blood and everything. And after about 4 days, they attempted to go in and close me back up because I was open, which they successfully did get that done 3 or 4 days later. Ended up with a pile of stitches and a pile of staples. And I had 3 or 4 big cross suture wires pulling everything together. Had a wound vac for probably 10 days. Didn't have enough drug meds, that's for sure. I was on a self-medicator, but it would only administer so much for a certain period of time. And I had used my hours allotment up in about 15 minutes, and very, very intense recovery.
How long did you have to stay in the hospital with that?
So my initial stay was 2 weeks. I spent 2 weeks in, and it was probably a little bit of my fault, but I was really pushing to go home. Like, I was at 2 weeks in the hospital. I was done. I was like, I just want to go home. I just want to, because I at that time still felt like I was dying. Like, I just want to go home, spend time with my dog and Amber, and be at my own house. And if this is the end of the road, this is, I want to be at home. I don't want to be stuck in some hospital bed hour away from my hometown. Mm-hmm. And so I was pushing. I was like, come on, I'm ready to go home. I'm off. I gutted through a lot of pain, and I was off my pain procedure that they gave you. You have to be able to control pain by medicine via mouth to get out of the hospital. And I gutted through some pain because I was like, I want out of here.
Yeah.
Well, you have to eat a meal before you leave. Yep. Okay, fine. So I ate some stuff at the hospital. Otherwise, I went 2 weeks without eating. Ate some stuff at the hospital. Almost puked, almost threw up, but the doctor come along and says, how'd the meal go? I saw good. He's like, all right, we'll send you home. Awesome. thinking we're good now. My own stupidity, I guess. So I was home for about 2 days, started developing stomach pain. And I was like, oh no.
Yeah, now you know what that feeling is.
Yep. So it's like, uh-oh. I went and told Amber, I says, well, I got some bad news. I says, we're going to have to go back to the emergency room, and let's just hope it's a lot simpler this time around. So go back in. 3 days later, been in the hospital 2 weeks, 3 days later, I'm back at the same ER. They don't mess around this time. 10 minutes, they had me rolled back into a machine and did another CT scan. And, well, Mr. Tuinstra, we got some good news and we got some bad news. You don't have any more perforations. The perforations are good. Your bowels are good, but you have a intestinal blockage. So we're going to have to bring you back to the hospital. Didn't quite really understand what a small bowel obstruction is. So I come to get to the hospital and they're like, okay, so here's the deal. We've got 2 options we can do. We can give you another NG tube and you can just kind of rest. Or we can go in and try to do something with these, what turned out to be big pockets of infection that was pushing on my intestines and closing them off. And he goes, I'll be honest, I don't know what the best idea is. So we're going to kind of leave it up to you, which, what a wonderful decision. I mean, you just got to sit there and like, oh, okay, so let's see here what we want to do. Hindsight, probably made the right decision. I was like, let's just do the NG tube and let's just kind of lay around, rest, get on some high-powered antibiotics and let's see what happens. You know, I said, at least I'm here. If it starts to go bad in a hurry, at least I'm here. And we can legitimately get into surgery fairly quickly if need be. So about 7 days went by, no food, no water, nothing. Ice chunks. Yeah, that's a good time. And, you know, they started to shrink and then things started to turn around and I ended up having, I don't know, probably 10 CT scans while I was in the hospital and they were really monitoring the growth or disperse of the infection. And they actually took a procedure, I'm not sure what they call it, where they take a needle and they go in and collect a sample of the infection and then see what kind of infection it is and make sure it's not antibiotic resistant. And, you know, that way they were very, very progressive towards making sure I was receiving treatment.
At this point, had they thought about why the bowels are perforated or like why any of this was happening?
Yeah, so I skipped a part. So my first initial stay, the GI team come around and they were like, we think you have Crohn's disease. We've seen Crohn's disease react with intestinal tissues similar to this, maybe not quite to that extreme, but we think you got Crohn's. So they brought around a book of information about Crohn's and my mom read it and she's like, you know, you don't really seem like you have any of these issues other than the bowel perforation. And she's like, it's like, bowel perforations is like one of the worst symptoms of Crohn's. So it's like you go to 0 to 100 like overnight. That just doesn't make sense to me. Mm-hmm. And that's like, well, just give me the book and then I will read it between naps and all my other stuff. And I kept thinking like, yeah, this doesn't make any sense. Does not. I mean, okay, you say Crohn's can act that way. Great. Well, what I didn't know at the time is they did take a sample of my intestinal tissue and did send it off to a pathological lab, I believe they call it, to have that tested for Crohn's. And I think that process takes like a week. So you don't know. You don't know. You still don't have an answer when you're laying there. Like, why did this happen? And 2 things is when you're sick, you want to know why this happened and what you're going to do to make yourself better. That's the only 2 things you really care about. Well, when you're sitting there waiting, that's the worst part. And ironically enough, so there was 4 GI doctors that would come around on a daily basis to check in. Well, one day a doctor come early and he come in there and he basically says, listen, I don't really want to tell you this, but we don't know what you have. Like, we have no idea. This is not Crohn's. You don't have Crohn's. I will almost guarantee you that. But we don't know what this is. We don't know what to treat you with. We don't know. We don't have a game plan. We have no idea what this is. And about the time that conversation had finished, the rest of the GI team come in and reprimanded him on the spot. You don't ever tell a patient you don't know what they have. You never show that you don't know what the next step is. You should never do this, right in front of me, which I was sitting there, well, with mixed emotions, because I was like, didn't really know a doctor should tell you that they don't know what you have. But I did appreciate his honesty. And then I says, I didn't know another set of doctors would come in and reprimand another doctor down to basically calling him a moron because he gave me the truth. And unfortunately, that doctor, I never seen him again. But at the time, I was very upset with him. I was like, why would you say that to me? Why would you tell me that? But then that was just a little bit more fuel to the fire of me saying, I just don't buy this Crohn's bit. So I never got a chance to thank that doctor, but he did eventually. He was kind of the reason that I got pushed into this other direction. So that was during my first stay. So my second stay was pretty uneventful. I mean, I basically laid around, did some tests. GI was hell-bent on this was Crohn's disease. That's the area we're going. We're going to get you set up with, I don't remember the drug for Crohn's. We're going to get you this IV, and this is Crohn's. We're going to fix your problems. You're going to be 100%. 6-8 months. We'll do a reversal on your ostomy. You'll be ready to rock and roll. Oh, yeah, by the way, we got a couple stitches loose in below, so you got a hernia in your stomach now by your belly button. But we'll fix that when we hook you back up. Great. Sounds like a plan to me. I said, but I would like a second opinion. Mm-hmm. Because I wasn't sold on the Crohn's thing. So I went to a highly recognized medical facility for a second opinion, while my local hospital was giving me the business on Crohn's. I was getting infusions every 6 weeks. I was getting all this stuff for Crohn's. Change your diet. Do this, do that. And so there was a wait to go to the major facility. And we started there. I went to their GI department, and they says, well, my local doctors say I got Crohn's. This was my symptoms. Where do we go from there? So I did the GI gambit. I had colonoscopy through my ostomy. I had throat scopes. I had test after test after test after test of I think I had a camera in every orifice that I had.
Yeah.
For them to be like, yeah, you don't have Crohn's. You don't have Crohn's. Oh, well, that's a lot of help. Mm-hmm. And then we just I says to them, what's the next step? What direction do we want to go? So there was a little bit of a gap between the GI and the next step. And on my way home to my mom, I said, I bet I got something really rare and something really stupid. And she's like, yeah, probably knowing your luck. I says, it's going to be something obscure, dumb, something nobody's heard of. And she's like, yeah, I agree. And the entire time that I was hunting for a reason I had these problems, it never ever occurred to me that there wasn't going to be a cure. Like, I knew I had something, but it never crossed my mind that there was going to be no cure. And so you always hang on to that hope. Like, okay, as soon as we figure out what we got, we could start the healing process. I can get rid of my ostomy. I can go back to normal life. I was on a 10, 12 pound weight limit. I farming with a 10-pound weight limit. Don't work real good. Hernia, bouncing up and down, doesn't mix very well. It's like, all right, I am ready to get on the mat, to get things going. So I returned to this large medical facility, and we started in the vascular department. We did blood tests. We did exams. We had ultrasounds. We had this, that, and everything else done.
Why did they start you in the vascular department?
So when I was in the GI department, there was a young intern there. Very, very smart. He was interested to learn about everything, including GI. And I said, I had this funny thing happen to me about 7 days ago. And I says, do you want to see it? And he's like, yeah, sure. And I says, well, I got to take the pants off to show you. And he kind of chuckles and he goes, okay. And I said, and it's not GI related. And he's like, okay. And I took my pants off, and my leg was black from basically my bone to my knee. And he's like, "Oh, Lord, what is that from?" And I says, "The worst leg cramp I've ever had in my life." And he's like, "Really?" And I was like, "Yeah." I says, "You could attest." So I live a mile away from my mom. And I got this leg cramp. And I had leg cramps my whole life. So like my calves, I'd get a leg cramp, hamstring cramps. I knew what cramps were, but I was having this cramp and I'm like, oh, God, I think I'm going to die here. Like, it was that bad. It was like somebody took like, I don't know, a couple forks, stuck them into my bones and then was pulling my muscles apart. Like, it was excruciating. Like, I don't cry that often. I was crying. I somehow stumbled into my truck, drove down to my mom's like a mile. I come flying through the door. I said, "Something's going on. I think I'm dying or something here." My mom's like, "What?"
And this is like after the bowel perforation.
Yes.
Had already, okay.
Yep. It was probably 2 months after my second visit that this cramp ended up happening. Oh, I thought I was dying, literally. And it lasted for like 45 minutes plus. Like, I never had a cramp last that long. And then the crazy weird part is when it quit. Done. Like, snap of the fingers and it was over. And I was like, wow, that's kind of weird. And then I got up and I walked. Couldn't even tell I had the cramp. Not an ounce of pain. Everything, my leg looked fine. I didn't have no signs of trauma, no bleeding, no nothing. Next day, it started turning a little blue.
Like a bruise blue?
Yeah, just a light, like if you get, a little light bruise, just that little blue. And it just kept getting worse and worse. And then it was starting to streak down my leg. And I'm like, go show my mom. And I was like, "Dad, do you think I need to go to the hospital for this?" And she's touching it. And she's like, "Well, it's not hot," using the old rule of thumb. If it ain't hot, it don't hurt. No need to go to the doctor. And so I never did. But then I showed the doctor in GI, and he's like, "That's not normal. That is not a leg cramp. I think we should do an ultrasound on it." So I did skip ahead a little bit. So getting the ultrasound, they're like, "Okay, there is something wrong there in your leg. There is something going on in there." So that kind of is how I ended up at Vascular. So then I ended up at Vascular, met a super, super awesome surgeon, and he goes through my CAT scans or my CT scans, and he's like, "Yep, I could see that. You have a dissection there in your leg, and I don't know how everybody else missed it at the other hospital that you were at, but," he says, "you actually got one on your artery that's going to one of your kidneys. You got a little bulge there." He says that there's something going on there. So he says, "There's definitely something going on with your vascular." And he's like, there's so many diseases that can affect that, like vasculitis. He says, we got to do a little more investigating. But he says, "I'm going to send you to this lady who's a little bit more versed on the array of different vascular diseases." Because he's like, I'm a surgeon. I know them, but my job is to work on them, not diagnose them. So he sent me this little lady, 5 foot, big club feet. I guess that doesn't really matter. But she's like, "Yep, I think you got vasculitis. I think that's what we got going on here." So it's not a GI deal, but I think it's a vasculitis deal. But she says, "I want you to go see this doctor. And then I think we should just for the kicks of it, do some genetic testing." So I went and seen this vascular doctor, and he's like, "Yep, I think we should do a little testing." He says, I firmly believe this is vasculitis." He says, "I think, that's where the buck's going to stop is vasculitis. We'll do some blood tests. We're going to do some background, some heredity stuff, and then we'll have you see a genetic counselor, and we'll go from there." So then I ended up having a test done, a panel done. Then the jig was up. We figured out what I had. Didn't realize even at that point how life was going to be different from now on.
Yeah, like what was going through your mind during all of this?
Well, that the medical system is funny, right? It's like, hurry up and wait. Hurry up and wait. Hurry up and get out here so we can do your DNA test. But nobody bothers to tell you that it takes 2 months to get it back. So hurry up, get down there, take the test, get back, going, all right, well, how long does the results take? Oh, well, it takes like 2 months. Oh, all right, well, swell. But the entire time I kept thinking, great, I want to get this taken care of because I want to get on the road to recovery. I want to ease my mind because I'll tell you, from July to that, we're in December now by the time we got to the Mayo Clinic and had a good bearing on what we were dealing with. I hadn't slept a wink. You had anxiety like overdrive. You just wanted to feel better. You wanted to know why. You still don't know what's wrong with you. Life sucks. We went through harvest. I harvested basically after I got most of my restrictions off. We basically went right into harvest, 12-hour days, bouncing all day long, trying to get through harvest because it's really just me and my brother, and then my mom does help during harvest as well. But it basically just 2 of us trying to do harvest and being sore and can't lift anything and not really recovered yet. I mean, a month and a half before that, I had major surgery. So it was very, very excruciating, painful mentally trying to process all that. But none of that wasn't prepared for what I would get later on when I actually got my full diagnosis.
Yeah, tell me about that.
So I was sitting in our shop office waiting for the test, and I seen that they called me, and I answered the phone, and hello, my name is such and such, and I work in the office of such and such. We just wanted to let you know we got your test back, and you have a genetic condition called VEDS. And we're sorry to tell you that, but you have VEDS. Okay, so what? And she's like, well, we've made you an appointment. Why don't you just come on down and we'll discuss it? Go see another vascular specialist. And he's like, yep, you have Ehlers-Danlos type 4. And hands me a packet of paper and says, well, here's some reading material for your drive home. Oh. It's not be a big deal, right? They hand you a stack of paper and tell you, here's some reading material for your ride home. Okay.
Yeah.
And then he goes, you have my blessing to have your ostomy reversal done at any time. Okay.
So you left that appointment feeling pretty good then.
Not too bad. And I'm driving home and I handed my wife the packet of papers. I said, I just briefly look through that a little bit and kind of see, what this Ehlers-Danlos business is all about. And she's reading it, and I'm like, talking about large, small intestines can rupture. You can have artery ruptures. Oh, okay. Well, that doesn't sound too terrible, but it could be serious, I suppose, on your heart, and you're optimistic because, like you said, now you know what you got. And you're like, wow, I'm sure they got some medicine to take care of that anyway, so we ain't going to worry about it that much. And I says, life expectancy normal? And she's like, yep, no change there, which... yeah, that probably in the hindsight, she probably wished she probably didn't tell me that. So it's a 3-hour drive from where I live to the facility. So we drive home and we drive by my mom's on the way home, and I stop and I says, hey, guess what, Mom? We figured out what I got, and it seems to be, not a big deal. And I hand her this packet of papers without looking at it. Mm-hmm. Going, here, you want to read up on it? Here's everything you need to know about it. And we left, and my wife never said anything, and I didn't think nothing of it. The next day, I stopped down to my mom's and I open the door and I come in and she's looking at me and she's completely white. And I'm like, are you okay? Are you sick now too? And no. I just read that information you dropped off here. I haven't slept a wink since you left. Mm. Well, what are you so upset about? She's like, what says in here that your life expectancy is like 50? And I'm like, what? I didn't know that. So I called my wife and I'm like, how come you didn't tell me that before I gave my mom that packet of papers? Yeah. And she's like, well, I didn't know you were going to give it to her and such. And so that led to a little bit of an intense conversation between both of us about that.
Yeah.
So that's how my mom found out I had.
Yeah. And that's terrible. I mean, and still for all that time, really nobody explained VEDS to you in a doctor's office.
No, not at that point.
So they just never got this vibe that you should look at this paper really closely or ask questions or anything like that.
No, because like I said, he's like, you can have your reversal anytime you want. You have my blessing. No big deal on my end. So then we ironically had a appointment with a colorectal surgeon before I seen my genetic counselor, and we're talking about, and he says, well, yeah, I can do your reversal, but it's high risk and there's some risk to it. And there's a couple different options we can do as far as the hookup, but just so you're aware of the high risks. And I'm sitting there like, what are you talking about? High risk? And he's like, well, this is a fairly high risk surgery, and I'm not even going to consider doing the surgery unless you're under 200 pounds. And he had some other stipulations. And I'm like, I mean, I said it just like this. I was like, dude, I just come from vascular. They're like, you go ahead and have your reversal. It's not a big deal. And he chuckles and looks at me and goes, the reason he says it's not a big deal is because he's not doing the surgery. He's not the one trying to do this. Like, this is a big deal. And I'm like, oh. And he actually asked me, he's like, has nobody actually gave you any type of counseling on this disease? And I was like, well, no, just a stack of paper. And he's like, well, I'll do the surgery if you want. You call my medical secretary and line up a surgery date if you decide you want to do it after you meet my prerequisites for the things I want and need you to do. So then I went to the genetic counselor. And if you weren't terrified enough at this point, if I wasn't terrified enough, that really took the cake there, because I come in and he's like, oh, yep, you got Ehlers-Danlos type 4. Okay. Didn't even know it was called VEDS until later on. And nonchalantly, with about the same amount of passion as you're ordering a double quarter pounder from McDonald's, he goes to me, this is a very serious, life-threatening disease that's going to kill you. You just as well go home, get your affairs in order, because this is going to kill you sooner than later. Something along that effects.
How old were you at this point?
36 years old. Well, that sucks. That means I got like less than 12 years to go, right? So I was devastated. And like I said, the nonchalant attitude of like, he could have been ordering a double quarter pounder from McDonald's. He had the same sympathy, same emotion. It was just to the fact. And like, well, isn't there like anything you can take for it? Nope, there's no cure. There's nothing you can do. Just go and live your life until it's over. So that was in 2018. So the date does kind of make a difference, because, you know very well in 2017, there was nothing going on for VED stuff. So we both come up through the dark ages. You were doing a lot of advocating, and I was just like feeling sorry for myself, like, this sucks.
But you've done a lot. You've done a lot now.
Well, yeah, everybody has their own method of advocating, I think. But the new diagnosed people in the last couple of years are very, very fortunate compared to us old school people that were diagnosed even, there's people that were diagnosed way back 2014. I think there's a couple actually that I know even earlier than that. I couldn't imagine living 20 years with VEDS before even having the resources that we have now. So yeah, it was just a nonchalant, no cure, see you later, let us know if you need anything. And that was it. Like, you would think that they would be like, listen, manage your health risks, eat healthy, mild exercise, take care of yourself, don't run yourself down, increase your things that you can control. Hey, by the way, we know you have VEDS now, so you're ahead of the curve a little bit. Like, if you have to have a surgery, now you know before you go in that things could get kind of weird. You're ahead of the curve now. So it's not all bad. It's not all dark. Nothing. Just see you later. Like, no, I can refer you to some type of therapist or therapy or anything. Like, we can get you into a program if you need to talk. No anxiety treatment. No, nothing. Just go home. Go home and die. And
that's terrible.
The worst thing to do is Google VEDS, because that's even worse yet than what I went through there. And what I found out later on, like now, some of the places that you thought would have correct information, like probably shouldn't say it, but like WebMD is like totally inaccurate. Like they have no idea what they're even putting out there. So when you have no resources and you Google it and you go to like, oh, okay, WebMD, that seems like a reputable website. But then later on, you realize that a lot of that information isn't true, or it's dated, or whatever. It makes it that much more confusing, scary. So yeah, it was just sheer luck that I stumbled across the VEDS movement. It was sheer luck that we had a connection and that we hit it off right away. Like the first time I met you, like we built a connection like instantly. Like I didn't even know that could happen. Now it's like every time I meet somebody at VEDS, it's like an instant connection. Like you just met your long lost brother or sister for the first time, but the minute you seen them, you knew they were connected to you somehow. It's a feeling that I never thought I'd ever experience. And then seeing what you do and some more of the other advocates in our group. And it's like, okay, I'm a very private person, which probably contradicts why I'm doing a podcast. But my prior life, I was a very private person and I never really opened up or really put myself out there. So it got me going. It's like, okay, my style of advocacy, what can I do to make it better for the people that are just getting diagnosed, or even the old school ones? So I created a Facebook group, safe space where you're not bombarded with medical questions and medical trauma and medical pictures. It's come hang out. If you got a passion about something, talk about it. Got a dog you love, post up some pictures. Everybody loves dogs. If you're an artist, show something that you've drawn, painted. So that was my way to advocate. I help out anybody that I can that asks for it. I don't necessarily, my style isn't to like gather all of the sheep, but I'll help one if one's in turmoil. That's the way I kind of call my advocation part of helping the VEDS community. And I try to support everybody that does something. Your podcast, there's a couple other people that do YouTube live and things like that. I always drop in. I always try to contribute. VEDS Connect. I try to be on most of them to encourage or help people along to tell people that VEDS sucks. VEDS not good, but your life's not over. It's different, but it's not over. I always tell everybody, don't let VEDS steal your soul. You're still a person. You still have worth. You still should be able to enjoy the things you love. Yeah, at times life might change. You might have to adapt something that you love because you can't do technically that anymore. That's my approach. That's how I get through it. I always tell people that want to do risky hobbies, as long as you accept the risk, if you know that if something goes bad while you're doing this activity and you're okay with that, then by all means do it. I love to ride motorcycle. If I was in a motorcycle accident and I was just a regular human, it's a bad deal. With VEDS, it's like super bad deal. But I love doing it, and I'm not going to let a disease define who I am. And I accept the risk. And it's a little bit morbid probably, but if I died doing something I love, then VEDS didn't win. And VEDS didn't conquer my soul or my mind. And I still lived a reasonably happy life. Like, yeah, it sucks I got VEDS, but there's a lot of good things that come from it too. And like I said, getting into the community and meeting some of the people, it inspires you to be a better person, I think.
Is that what got you to get into advocacy for this? Because in 2018 seems ridiculously hard with the medical things you went through and then the mental challenges of not only not getting good information about VEDS, but also being diagnosed with very little support and it feels like very little compassion from the medical facilities and the medical professionals that you saw. And since we were diagnosed kind of similar times, I just remember how devastating of a hit that was. How did you get from that point to where you are now, where you're really involved? You're the admin of that VEDS social group, and you've made it to this place where, don't give up on life, which is exactly the opposite of what the medical professional kind of told you.
Yeah. Right. Yep. I'm not going to lie. There were some dark years there. I've had other trauma medical issues in my life earlier, which kind of maybe built me for this a little bit. But there were some dark years there. I struggled with the mental health part of it. Like, why me? What did I do? Man, I must have karma mad at me. I was fortunate. I never struggled with thoughts of suicide or anything. Like, I never had that. I know some members have really struggled with the suicide part. My outlook on that was like, hey man, my life is going to be short enough the way it is. Why do I want to shorten it up anymore? And then, like I said, it just, you slowly, I guess I eventually got to the point that I accepted my mortality. Some people will probably say, Brent, that's kind of morbid, but I just accepted the fact that I am going to die. I mean, we're all dying. Mine's probably going to be a little quicker than I'd like, but I just accepted it. That's what's going to happen. And I was like, okay, I got this whole list of stuff now that I want to do before I get to that point. Let's get doing it. Let's not waste time feeling sorry for myself. So I'm a cancer survivor. I had cancer when I was a kid. So I kind of went through the bullying thing in school. We grew up on a farm that we were expected to work. We didn't necessarily have the social options to be in sports already. So that my whole childhood was kind of staggered, where I was kind of protected through life a little bit, that I didn't do some of the high risk things like normal kids do that could have potentially led to an incident earlier. So I always kind of just laugh that my life just kind of has just been built up to this diagnosis. And I went through some dark years after the diagnosis. And then it's like, I want to help people in my way, in a useful way. So yeah, I worked through it. Everybody has their own coping tools. Some people are very religious. Some people are on the higher power spectrum. Some people think it's just karma. You just got to find your coping mechanism to move forward and realize that life is just not over. It's just different.
Is that what you would tell somebody who's newly diagnosed now?
Yeah, 100%. Don't let vets do your soul. Do what you love if you're willing to accept the risks, and just keep at it. Just don't give up. Just don't give up on life, because then it wins and you don't get to enjoy the great things that can come, like the great friends that I've made. You would have asked me in 2018 if I'd have this whole core of friends that I could call at any time. I would have said, you're nuts. You're nuts. I don't know. I ain't even have that kind of connection, but I tell you, it's amazing. And if anybody's struggling, just reach out. And you don't even have to reach out very far.
Yeah. How do they find the VEDS social group?
So the VEDS social group, if you want to, probably, I don't know what the easiest way would be. If you get into the community, there's a couple Facebook pages that are pretty prominent. If you get into them, you'll see me drop in a message every once in a while. Otherwise, you'll have to just search Brent Tuinstra on Facebook and shoot me a message. The only restrictions are you need a confirmed DNA test, a medically accepted clinical DNA test. So
like not 23andMe or Ancestry or something. Yeah.
Just if your geneticist orders your test, that will be work. All I need is your name, your variant, and we'll get you in. If you hang out in the community a little bit, you'll make a connection, and more than likely one of your friends will be in the group too. So if you're struggling to find, otherwise reach out to you. I'm sure you can get me in touch as well.
Yes, absolutely. One of the things that you talked about earlier in this interview was that doctor that came in who told you, that they didn't know, that he didn't think that it was Crohn's, that he didn't know what it was, but that it wasn't Crohn's and they just didn't know. And I know you had mixed emotions about that at the time, but I think I heard some gratitude in there too. I just want to, and I hope that eventually this doctor is listening to that, because I think it's really important to get that kind of feedback from people when you're able to. But I always ask people what they want medical professionals to know about VEDS or living with VEDS. And with the interactions that you have with the medical professionals all through 2018 and after and dealing with this diagnosis, what would you want them to know if they were listening to this now?
So the unfortunate part of what happened to me in 2018 caused me not to go to the doctor for almost 2 years. And in my personal experience, if you don't know, it's okay to say, hey, I don't know, but we're going to figure it out. We're going to do what we got to do to get a solution. And it's okay if you say, hey, I have to reach out to somebody that I think might have an answer, but I don't know the answer. That's okay. And honesty is always the best policy, in my opinion. If you just give it to me straight, that's what I need. And if I need some guidance after that, I will ask. One thing I want to say to the community also is, don't assume your local doctor knows nothing. I am super, super fortunate. I have an outstanding geneticist in my large but small town hospital. He actually trained at Johns Hopkins. He knows Dr. Black. Don't assume that your local doctor don't know anything. And one thing I usually use as a gauge is the VEDS movement offers classes that are CME credit qualifying. And I always ask, hey, I can get you some free CME credits. Are you interested? And I says, you might learn a thing or two about VEDS. What do you think? Most any doctor, unless you are talking to the top VEDS doctors in the country, should jump all over that. Like, I've had great success. Every doctor I've met in my local hospital, would you be interested in this class? Absolutely. Send me that link. So that's something I use to gauge if this is going to be the right doctor for me. Another thing too, if I decide you're not the doctor for me, it's nothing personal, because I've had the conversation. I don't think you're the doctor for me. It's not that I'm being mean. I just want to make sure, or have the team I feel absolutely the best about. And if you're not part of that team, it's okay. Like, don't take it personal. And my team that I've built, ego takes a back seat. Like, if anybody gives me any issues about taking outside information, you're going on the not on the team, boss buddy, because I'm not asking you to let somebody else tell you how to reinvent the wheel. But if I say, hey, I got this specialist that's really good at this, would you mind reaching out and seeing he or she's opinion on a certain situation or a procedure? I'm not saying I'm not going to let you do the procedure, but let's just make sure we're all on board. Because I've had that unfortunate incident too, where I thought I had everything all established and we knew what conditions I had and the concerns that I had. And then we get to the day of a procedure and they're like, what? You got VEDS? What's that? I thought we talked about this. Thought we had this all established. So don't be ashamed to ask questions, ask more questions, and make sure that everybody's on the same page. But what I'd like to tell the medical professionals is have a little compassion when you work with people with VEDS. Even if it's just like, hey, we have a terminal illness counselor that we can put you in touch with, or, just giving you some just a little help, not just, like I said, ordering a cheeseburger and kicking you out the door kind of compassion. And like I said, don't be scared to be like, ask your patients, hey, do you have a resource for this? Like, I'm not totally sure what we should do here. Do you have a direction we can go? That's my advice. Like, I just wish everybody could work together. I wish the medical field didn't have to be so complicated. I wish there could be better communication. I wish that just everything could smooth together a little bit easier. One thing that extremely frustrates me is we have a very viable drug on a shelf sitting somewhere that we can't do a trial on because of something so dumb as money. Like, we don't have enough money. We can't do this test, this trial. Really? So what's a human life worth? $1 million, $2 million, $50? I mean, what are we talking here? If that drug saved one person's life, it's more than well worth it. And it's so frustrating when you're in the VEDS community that stuff gets canceled because of something so minor as money. One other thing that bothers me too is the awareness for all these diseases that if you don't already know, like cancer, like they have all this cancer awareness stuff. Like, it's 2023. If you don't know what cancer is, have you been living under a stone? Let's rotate some in, right? Let's get some other ones going. Like, yeah, breast cancer is horrible, but pretty sure everybody should know about that by now, right? You should get your exams and everything. So it just seems like the medical community wants to hurry up and wait, and advancement is a struggle, it seems. So yeah. That's my rant. Right? I mean, I could go on for hours and hours and hours and probably really make some people mad, but I'll take the high road this time.
No, it's a good message, though. I mean, you have a lot of great messages in there and a lot of good things that we need to do better at in the medical field and the research field. And it is really hard knowing that that's the only thing between us and a clinical trial for VEDS for that medication is money. And it's absolutely like I have so many words for it, It's hard. And if anybody here has millions of dollars they want to donate to a clinical trial,
we'll set you
that
up.
would be fantastic. Yes. Let me know. I will direct you to the people who need the money for the trial. But it's hard. It's hard having a rare condition and having all of these layers of interactions with people who don't know a lot about it or don't have the compassion when they're talking to you about it. And I think it's a really, really important step to improving the relationship between people with VEDS and the doctors in our community that, our local doctors who should be able to help us.
Yeah, because there's actually more of us than they realize, I think. You go from total obscurity to in my Facebook group, I think we're approaching 80 people, and we've only had that going since February, I believe it was when I started that. And that's just a few months. And that's each person in that group is confirmed. I mean, there's no family members, no non-confirmed people in that group. So there's a lot of us. And that's only the people over 18. And it seems like there's a tragic amount of children being diagnosed, which is good that they're getting diagnosed, but a tragic amount of children that have it.
Yeah.
So I just, if they want to send that drug try or send me some of those drugs to try, I'll try them. If I turn purple, I guess, oh well. I mean, ship them on out.
Oh, goodness.
I think there's probably 5, 6, 10, probably 20 people will be like, hey, I'll willingly try that stuff. Just send her on over.
Yeah. I mean, I think the reality is there's not a shortage of people who want to participate in that trial. It's just a shortage of money.
Right.
Which is so simple and also so challenging to overcome at the same time. So thank you for coming on to the podcast. And also I want to say thank you for getting that VEDS social group started. I can say from my perspective that there's the genetically confirmed VEDS group, and then now there's this VEDS social group, and it's a completely different vibe. And I think both of them are so, so important as resources for our community. But I didn't realize how much I was really needing that social space with other people with VEDS that was not geared towards the medical aspects of living with VEDS. And it's about, it's about gardening. It's about painting. It's about your pets. It's about music. It's about all of that. And I just really, really appreciate you for starting that group and for continuing to administer it.
I'm happy to do it as long as there was a need. And when I started that group, I didn't even anticipate how much the need was there. And actually, like you said, you didn't realize you needed it till you had it. And that steal one quick more minute from you back to the advocating part. Like I said, I'm a reserved person. I don't put myself out there. I hope by me doing this podcast that it shows that it'll inspire maybe somebody else to come on and tell their story or their troubles or frustrations or whatever it may be. I hope I inspire somebody to be like, hey, if Brent can do it, I can do that too. And I think that's part of the grieving process, if you want to call it. Sometimes you just got to talk about it. It might hurt. It might not be fun. I've heard some tear jerkers that you've done, and you're very compassionate when you do them. And no matter how tragic your story is, I think you would do a great job comforting that person through that journey if they want to do it, if it's painful. Some people like mine, if I can just help one person, it was all worth it. Like if my life ended and I helped just one person not feel that fear or that aloneness that I did, then I will call it a mission accomplished.
You've done a great job, Brent. Thank you so much for doing everything that you do.
Yep. Thank you for what you do, because you are so all over the place doing everything, so selfless with your time. I can't imagine the energy it takes, but thank you for everything you do.
Thanks, Brent. I'm happy to do it. Thanks for tuning in this week to listen to Brent Tuinstra sharing his experience with VEDS. If you're ready to get involved or meet others in the community, check out the episode show notes for links to online support groups. There's also a couple more events by the Marfan Foundation before the holidays, including a Walk for Victory today in Nashville, Tennessee, and the LA Regional Symposium on Marfan, VEDS, and Loeys-Dietz, which is today as well. A link to these events are in the episode show notes. Next week, we'll talk to Mary Myers, whose daughter Adeline has Loeys-Dietz syndrome. If you like this show, I hope you will consider sharing it with your friends on social media to raise awareness of these conditions. And you can also support the production of this podcast by joining my Patreon. Thanks so much, and I'll see you soon.